Okay, thank you. Thanks for coming today, guys. Try not to be too boring. As Carlos said, me and Holly have been here since January doing a 3-month internship, and we've mainly been working on the Horus project. And we were each given a nest to monitor. I had 6N4, Holly had 6S2 from the 2012 breeding season. And we basically monitored all of the activity inside the nest that took place from the moment the first egg was laid until the moment the last egg hatched. And I'm going to briefly introduce you to how we did this, talk about my nest. Holly's going to then talk about her nest, and go on to do a bit of discussion and conclusion. So the aims, as Carlos said, is to analyze incubation strategies and the reproduction behavior of the Thalassocastrals. And we did this by a combination of fieldwork and also analysis of pre-recorded video sequences and photos from the nest boxes. And the fieldwork, as Carlos said, took place in La Palma del Condado. There's also a nest colony on the top of this building as well. So this is a screenshot of what we were doing basically, and as Carlos said, there's a motion-sensitive video camera inside each nest, which records any activity that takes place in the nest. And me and Holly went through all of the photos and videos and recorded any information that we observed on a PDA using the Cyber Tracker app. And as you can see here, it's got the time and date stamped in the top left corner, the 6N4, the number of the nest, and we just flicked through the arrow keys and recorded what we observed in the PDA, on the PDA. And we were looking for and observing the behaviors of the castrals inside the nests, which included any feeding activity that took place when food was brought into the nest and consumed inside the nest, when the male or female entered or left the nest, and also when any eggs were laid or hatched. And I've just got a few definitions here for you. We also were looking at the incubation, which is when either parent lies over one or more of the eggs, and covering or tapper, which is when the parent covers one or more of the eggs without taking the incubation position. And it's quite obvious the difference between incubation and covering. And also we were recording when any of the eggs were relocated, which was when a parent deliberately changed the position of the eggs with their beaks. So a bit of key information for my nest, 6N4, was that the first egg was laid on the 16th of May, and then an egg was laid every second day from then until the 22nd of May, when the 4th egg was laid. And the eggs hatched roughly a month later, between the 18th and 21st of June, with 2 eggs hatching on the 18th of June. And then we put all the information from the PDA into Microsoft Excel and ran some calculations and formulas, which enabled us to come up with data to produce a few graphs and tables. So we've done some of that for you. This one basically shows the total time in hours the female spent inside the nest on each day. The red arrows indicate when the 4 eggs were laid, and these little symbols indicate when the eggs hatched. So for my nest, the female spent on average just under 16 hours a day inside the nest. And as you can see, after the 2nd egg is laid, the time inside the nest it's roughly consistent after the 18th of June. It fluctuates a bit, but it's fairly consistent until the final few days when the eggs begin to hatch, and the female spends almost 24 hours inside the nests with the eggs and chicks. And in contrast to this is the time the male spent inside the nest. So he spent less than half the time as the female did in the nest, about 6 hours and 48 minutes on average. It's important to note, though, that the female spent the entire night inside the nest, so from about 8 in the evening to 5 the next morning. So that's probably why she spent twice as much time in the nest as the male did. And during the daylight hours, they were roughly equal. The male increases his time inside the nest steadily as each egg is laid, and then again, same as the female, he sort of levels off and stays relatively constant until the eggs begin to hatch on the 18th of June, and the male does completely the opposite as the female. He left the nest, hardly spent any time in the nest, and that's because he was mainly going out for food and foraging trips, and he'd only come in the nest for a couple of minutes at a time to feed the female, who would then consume the prey herself or give it to the chicks to eat. Another one here, I've plotted the total time and hours of the female and male incubation, so the time they were sat covering the eggs. And again, the female incubates for roughly twice as long as the male does. And as each egg is laid, you can see that the incubation time for the male and female steadily increases until, again, the final few days when the female rapidly increases her time incubating and the male hardly spends any time incubating. And also, it's interesting that the male and female seem to work together as a group and a team to incubate the eggs, and some days, like on the 28th of May here, when the female in blue didn't incubate for as long as normal, the male increased his time a little bit and compensated for her. And then again on the 6th of June as well. So they sort of worked together to make sure that the eggs were being incubated for long enough. This was a little bit more confusing. I've put the total time for each day of the male and female incubation and cover times. So the female incubation is in purple, male incubation is blue, female cover red, and male cover right at the bottom is blue. And again, it's interesting because after the fourth egg is laid, the time that they spend incubating and covering is roughly fairly consistent, and it's always under 24 hours, obviously, until the final few days when the eggs begin to hatch. The incubation and cover time drops slightly, and that's probably because the fact that the male didn't spend much time in the nest, so the female was left to do all of the incubation by herself. Just another little table here. We added up together all of the total hours of incubation and covering for the female and male. And as you can see again, the female is more than double the amount of incubation than the male. And a total of about 730 hours of incubation was observed, which roughly translates to about 30.5 days. And that's quite a lot, but for my nest especially, the male wasn't very good at incubating all 4 eggs at the same time. He'd often incubate 2 eggs and leave 2 eggs uncovered, and then he'd go to the other 2 eggs and incubate them and then go back to the first 2 eggs. So even though there's 30 days of incubation time, not all 4 of my eggs were incubated the same amount and equally at the same time. That's all I have for my nest. So I'll pass you over to Holly.
Okay, so my nest was 6S2, and I have my key dates here. So again, there was 4 eggs laid at 2-day intervals from the 17th of May till the 23rd of May. All 4 eggs hatched within 2 days of each other. So on the 17th of June there was 2 eggs, and on the 18th of June there was another 2 eggs. And then this shows, again, the female time inside the nest for nest 6S2. So you can see it does increase slightly after the first egg has laid, but it's not as consistent as the one seen before in 6M4 with Callum's nest. There's also no increase at the end of the 17th and 18th when the eggs began to hatch, as was seen in Callum's nest. Also, 2 dates that seem a bit unusual are the 7th here and the 9th. The 7th seems to be quite a lot lower than the rest of the other days, and the 9th seems to be quite a lot higher than the others. And then this is the male, which is quite a lot lower than the female total time spent inside the nest. You can see the time does increase though as the eggs are laid. Also you can see again the same dates are a bit unusual, the 7th and the 9th. So on the 7th it looks like, because the female time inside the nest was quite low, the male was compensated for this by staying in for longer. And on the 9th, where the male wasn't inside the nest at all, I think the female was inside the nest for over 21 hours, obviously compensating for that. And then again you can see a decrease inside the nest as the eggs were hatched, as was seen in Callum's nest as well. So this is the total incubation time. So the male started incubation after the 2nd egg was laid, you can see in the red, and the female after the 3rd egg was laid. And then again you can see like them working together as a team to try and keep the amount of incubation up. As on the 29th, the female incubation is less, the males is more, especially here on the 7th when the females is less and the males is probably double the amount it usually would be. And then on the 9th, when the male wasn't there and the female was incubating for about 21 hours. Again, the male in this nest did spend the night time outside of the nest, so that probably is why he wasn't spending as much time incubating as the female. And then, again, as similar to Callum's, we've got the total female incubation time, total male incubation time, total female cover time, and total male cover time. So after the 4th egg was laid, it remains fairly consistent, but it's actually not as consistent as Callum's, which stayed almost straight throughout. There's also 2 days, the 30th and the 31st, where it seems to be, just here, it seems to be quite a lot lower than the others. And also at the beginning you can see like the red bars, there was quite a lot more, the female spending a lot more time covering the eggs, but not so much time incubating. And then once the 4th egg was laid, the cover time almost stops completely, that just is a very small amount, and that's when the incubation really begins. So this is the total for my nest. So the total for male and female incubation was 24.3 days, which was actually 6 days less than, well, about 6 days less than Callum's. But in this nest they seemed quite experienced parents, because they seemed to incubate all 4 of the eggs almost all the time, never leaving any of them out. And then the total hours of cover was 1.7 days. So for both the nests, Callum's 6M4 and mine 6S2, the average female time inside the nest was really similar, only about 3 minutes different, which I think was quite interesting that it was so similar to one another. So the male time inside the nest was quite a lot less, but as we said before, this is probably because he wasn't spending the night times in the nest. And then the behaviour of the birds did seem to change once the first eggs began to hatch. So with 6M4, we experienced the increase in female incubation and time inside the nest, but not so much in 6S2. And both nests experienced a decrease of male time inside the nest. And we think this is probably for the male to go out to catch prey, because the food that was brought into the nest went from less than one food a day to multiple, to food being brought in multiple times, which was quite interesting to see. Also, as we mentioned, the parents in 6S2 seem to be more experienced, as they seem to be covering, you can see here there's a female, I don't know how clear it is, female covering all 4 of the eggs in this photo, incubated, whereas in Callum's nest, this is the male just covering 2 of the eggs, which was quite often the case, I think, with the female and the male. So we think this could maybe explain why all the eggs in 6S2 hatched within 2 days, whereas in Callum's nest 6M4, they hatched within a 4-day period. So we think the strategy of 6S2 of incubating all 4 eggs at the same time seemed to be more effective, because not only did all the eggs hatch within 2 days, they also hatched like exactly a month after, and the nest also had 6 days less of incubation time. So it appears that because they're incubating all the eggs at the same time, they seem to hatch quicker and with like less energy expenditure from having to incubate the eggs for an extra 6 days, as they did in 6 and 4. And just lastly, we thought it maybe be interesting just to see, which we finished when it was the last egg that hatched, but we thought maybe it would be quite interesting to look at how many of the chicks actually successfully fledged from the nest. So, but yeah, all eggs hatched, so it was successful in that respect. Okay. And yeah, that's everything.